Our scripture today comes from the book of John, chapter 1, verse 1 through 5. In the beginning, there was the Word. The Word was in God's presence, and the Word was God. The Word was present to God from the beginning. Through the Word, all things came into being, and apart from the Word, nothing came into being that has come into being. In the Word was life, and that life was humanity's light, a light that shines in the darkness, a light that the darkness has never overtaken.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to leave that up if that's okay. This is a very strange passage of Scripture. So I love to preach on it every year at this time. Because I think it gives us an incredible glimpse into the early church before superstitions completely crowded out rational thought and magic replaced mysticism. This is known as the prologue to John. We just read it. It's very strange. It's a little Greek poem that's put before the stories of John. When I got out of seminary, the first thing I want to do is go back and read like the early church, because we didn't study that very much. And basically what I was taught is the early church didn't understand Jesus. It was only Augustine and Luther and Calvin. Of course, the best is the Presbyterians, but that didn't make any sense to me. It seemed to me the people that were closest to the events would have some kind of idea that would be important. And what stunned me in reading the writings of the early church is how smart they were, how educated, how they were quoting Plato, other religions, other philosophers. And that's what you're seeing here. John is about to tell mythological stories. John does not have parables like the other Gospels do. So he's going to tell fantastical stories that illustrate spiritual truths. And the way we understand that's true is when you look at this passage. In the beginning was the Word. We're going to look at that. That's the word's logos. We get the word logic from it. But it's a translation of the Greek Sophia, the wisdom, this feminine spirit through which the world was created. It's very, very important to realize Jesus is quoting Jewish mysticism in these stories. Now, the words are being put in his mouth because this is being written way after he's gone. He can't defend himself anymore. But the word in the beginning has two senses. It's arche. It can mean a long time ago, in the beginning, like chronologically, but it can also be talking about the essence of things. The creative principle by which things come into being. I think that's going to make a lot more sense in understanding this. And realizing that Christmas, the trick is not to understand the Bible, the trick is to understand our own lives. If you understand the Bible from cover to cover, but you don't know who you are, that's not a good place to be. So, the Word is the creative principle that gives everything being. The Bible is a witness to the Word. There's a huge difference. If you think the Bible is the Word of God, then you don't need science, do you? You want to know how the world was created in 7 days. People, little clay dolls. You breathe life into them. But then they eat apples and you have to punish them. So these are mystical parables that help us understand not so much who Jesus was, because you have no way of knowing that, but who you and I are. They're taking us into our own depths and helping us recognize our own voice. Profoundly important, I think. That word logos, the earliest place I've ever seen it is in a philosopher named Heraclitus. And for Heraclitus was the philosopher that said everything is changed, nothing abides, no one ever steps in the same river twice. But there has to be an organizing principle of change, or else it'll all just be static. So the logos, the word, the Sophia, was the organizing principle, the creative principle that gives us being. It says, in the beginning was the word. And in the Greek, it says, it looks like it's saying that this logos was towards God, somehow, maybe in the presence in some way. But the Greek is just the opposite. Instead of saying the word was God, and it's the only translation I've ever heard, but in Greek it says, and the word was God. No, I mean, God was the word, excuse me. God was the word. In other words, you understand that God is a symbol of a process that's too deep and mysterious for us to understand it. So this is poetry. This is cosmic poetry. And it's at the first, I see it like a legend on a map. The legend explains the cities aren't really going to be blue, right? The highways aren't really going to have stars on them. It's a kind of coded message. The Word was present to God from the beginning. Through the Word, all things came into being. Apart from the Word, nothing came into being. You ever notice how Jesus, in his whole life, he talks about himself as a way, a path, a door, a gate? This wisdom is something that doesn't happen to us, it happens through us. So you're not being asked to surrender your mind, your heart, or your strength. If anything, Jesus is guiding us to that depth. Through the Word, all things came into being, and it's using the word Genesis there. Apart from the Word, nothing came into being, it has come into being. In the Word was life. John's going to talk about light, life, the Word, the Logos. Those are going to be themes that he's going to play with. In the Word was life, and that life was humanity's light, a light that shines in the darkness, a light that the darkness had never overtaken. So we want to understand what is meant by this light. Have you ever noticed that in the hymns of Christmas, there's all these Zen-like ironies? The silent word, the light shining from the darkness, the pregnant virgin. If you think in terms of Zen, what that's doing is taking you deeper into things than words normally go. So I want to walk through those. So Logos is sort of this pattern of things. To the mind, it's beauty. To the heart, it's beauty. To the mind, it's mathematics, logic, science. And to the will, to the human responsibility, it's kindness and justice. So this is calling us to be completely human, not to surrender to religion, not to surrender to a preacher. That's the opposite of what this is saying. You don't listen to, you listen through. How does this resonate with your own depths? If my wisdom isn't ringing your bell, then stop listening. Right? Find someone who does that. But the point is, it has to be born in you. And that's the Christmas story. How is the sacred born in us? The idea of the silent word. I really like that image that there's, in Zen, they talk about the unrung bell. Sound of one hand clapping. When you leave dualism, there's not sound, but the source of sound is still there. And you can kind of feel that musically. I mean, there are people who find music in everything. In the ancient world, we did a series one time on Pythagoras, which tells you why the church is so small. But Pythagoras was before Christianity, and he found mathematics everywhere. And he would take lengths of strings and realize that the tones on them relied on mathematical properties, how long they were. So he began to realize that the universe has a kind of mathematical property to it. But again, music sounds as beauty. It doesn't look like math. It's talking about something that we give birth to. That beauty, sometimes you find it. But the Christmas story is describing a really horrific political situation. And you probably can't imagine this, but can you imagine like rich leaders that taxed poor people? Can you imagine a leader that didn't approve of how somebody was born and so chased after them? Chased after them. This is a very old story. And I think it's critically important this Christmas, maybe more than ever, to realize that the backdrop of the Christmas story is very similar to this: oppression, colonization, patriarchy. They didn't call it capitalism, but property was more important than people. And these are prisons of the human soul. And Christmas was a time of birth of the sacred, of radical joy in those situations. Jesus didn't magically get rid of Caesar. And Pontius Pilate, can you imagine having a bad governor? I mean, it takes a lot of imagination to do this work. Herod is a very important part of the story. If we let the one who shall not be named, oh heck, if we let Donald Trump, Greg Abbott, crush our spirits, then we're missing the point here. Because what our conditions call us to is giving birth to beauty in the midst of ugliness, truth in the midst of lies, and justice in the midst of injustice. But it happens through us. One of my favorite hymns, remember this from my funeral, Morning is Broken. We'll be singing that after this. And it's a mystical poem, but what it does is take the Genesis story and move from arche as time to arche as importance. It's looking at the Genesis story and saying, this is what's happening right now. Listen and see if you don't agree. Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise from them springing fresh from the word. See, when the first time I heard Cat Stevens do this song, I didn't realize this was an old hymn. This was written in 31. It's a Christian hymn, but it's mystical. We are living at a time when the word has been silenced. When censorship, when oppression, when somebody tells the truth about the experience of people of color in this nation, when they try to speak the truth, they're silenced. And that's what Christmas is about. Moving from silent word to singing the songs. Peace on earth, goodwill to all people. It's not partisan, but it's being treated as partisan. Universal human rights are not partisan. And anyone who says they are is a demagogue. Right? Universal human rights are not partisan. Using one scale for every person is not partisan. So the first idea is this, the silent word. The second is the light shining out of the darkness. Again, a very strange thing. But have you ever been like on the outside and you come indoors and you can't see anything, and then your vision clears? Jesus said you are the light of the world. So when you find yourself in a time of what John called darkness, first of all, that deals with not being able to see. It's night as opposed to day. But it's also ignorance or trance. And the essence of the trance is to be an individual and not recognize the tie that binds. So you think day and night are completely different things. Heraclitus said, no, they're one process. And the logos is that which unites them, harmonizes them. Your life and your death are not two separate things. There's one continuous flow with that. And as long as you think they're two separate things, heartbreak is never far away. When we look at the clouds, a lot of times we see shapes and images and appearances. But those are things we're projecting onto the universe. We think if we got what we wanted, we would be happier. And what I think John is trying to say is, if you're not coming from the creative syllable of the universe, if you're projecting what you want onto your life, you're going to be wounded by that. Because no matter how high you fly into the world of fantasy and illusion and religion, trance, and all of that, you're going to land in reality. That's where the plane lands. So choosing a worldview because it makes you feel comfortable, it's like getting on an airplane that doesn't have landing gear. Right? It may be fine, the service may be great, but the landing is going to be really rough. The idea of just looking at nature as it is, not asking it to fit our purposes, but to fit our lives into nature. I love this second verse of Morning is Broken. It says, sweet the rains do fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness, where God's feet pass is a literal, it says his feet, but basically it's saying that creative principle, whether it's a person or not, and I have my doubts that it could be a person because it creates everything, so why would it look like us? But we can experience it personally, and that's what we're really looking for. We're not looking for the meaning of life in some abstract sense. We're looking to live meaningfully. And we can do that, but we have to do that in the flow of life, in the logos. Not the words of a preacher, not the words of a book, but the patterns of nature. The patterns of DNA. If we can find the sacred there, it will be there for us everywhere. Can you imagine the difference you would make? You can't change a country that's imploding. But what if you were the example of beauty in an ugly time and truthfulness in a dishonest time? Wouldn't that be the most important thing you could do? Because a lot of people are just lost. They don't know. They haven't seen a human being in years and years and years. And the problem with fundamentalism and fascism is we start fighting them and we become like them. We lose the essence of who we are in the fight against them. So what the passage is calling you to do is to not look for truth outside yourself, but to give birth to the truth where you are. And then finally, I love the image of the Virgin Mother. I don't believe in magic. It's possible. I mean, it's possible that happened. You know, people give the examples of frogs do. You know, we're not frogs. It's like, yes, one-celled animals. Yeah, okay. But I want something that's going to illumine my life here and now. Have you ever had a teacher, maybe they weren't married, but they gave birth to your soul in a way your biological parents didn't? That's a Virgin Mother. Somebody who, for no biological reason, took you under their wing and gave birth to who you truly are. Isn't that what the world needs more than some kind of magic trick? We can do that. We can do that for each other. The story of Christmas talks about darkness, coldness, Herod is hunting. It's not a pleasant story. So why is it the happiest time? I think because of the life that we're invited to do within our own darkness, with our own time of powerful people being cruel. We're here anyway. Why not make it a time of dignity? A time of living out the values that we've always espoused? What if instead of celebrating Jesus as the Word made flesh, you became the Word made flesh? You embodied your own values. How would that feel? I think our hymn describes it very well. Last verse of Morning is Broken. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day. I think Jesus was a great soul who's calling us to be great souls. To not get so trapped in our own private life, we don't realize the gifts we have to share are where our happiness comes from, where our peace comes from, where our joy and meaning come from. So I see this little poem at the 1st of John as incredibly important. To step out of the mythologies, to step out of arche as what supposedly happened a long time ago, to arche meaning what's most important right now. What is the source of your artistic joy? What is the source of your intellectual integrity? What is the source of your nobility? I believe this little prologue helps us understand that the punchline is not something about Jesus. The punchline is something about you. It's somebody reaching across the centuries and saying to you, you are the light of the world. Become the Word made flesh. Well, these are my struggles with the text. We'll take a moment for you to think about how you would understand these words.